Welcome to Venezuela, a country that sits atop the world's largest proven oil reserves. Yes, even more than Saudi Arabia. For decades, this black gold has been both a blessing and a curse, shaping Venezuela's destiny and drawing the attention of powerful nations across the globe. But oil isn't the only thing bubbling beneath the surface. Venezuela is also home to more political drama than a reality TV show, with power struggles, betrayals, and shifting alliances playing out on the world stage. The year is 2025 and Venezuela has become the main stage for a high-stakes global power struggle. The United States and China, two superpowers with competing interests, are locked in a tense contest for influence over this chaotic yet crucial nation. Both countries are pulling out all the stops: diplomacy, economic pressure, and covert operations, each determined to tip the balance in their favor. Picture Venezuela as a valuable house in disrepair. The United States is demanding that the current resident, Nicolas Maduro, pack his bags and leave, while China is standing firmly by his side, offering support and resources to keep him in power. What started as a neighborhood dispute has now escalated into a full-blown international crisis, turning Venezuela into a flashpoint for global tensions and rivalries. Meanwhile, the fate of Venezuela's 28 million people hangs in the balance. Ordinary citizens are caught in the crossfire, their lives shaped by domestic battles and the ambitions of foreign powers. Every day, Venezuelans face the harsh realities of hyperinflation, food shortages, and a broken political system. For many, basic necessities are out of reach, and hope for a better future seems to slip further away. The struggle for Venezuela is about more than just oil or politics. It's a battle between democracy and authoritarianism, a new kind of Cold War fought not with armies but with loans, sanctions, propaganda, and relentless diplomatic pressure. So how did a single presidential election become a proxy battlefield for the world's most powerful nations? To understand, we need to rewind to the chaotic and deeply contested election of 2024. That election was supposed to mark a new beginning for Venezuela, a chance to heal old wounds and move forward. Instead, it split the country and the world down the middle, igniting passions and rivalries that refuse to die down. Get ready for a story with more twists and turns than a telenovela, but with stakes that are infinitely higher. This is the world's most stressful game of political musical chairs, and the next move could change everything. The year 2024 was meant to be a turning point for Venezuela. After years of hardship, many Venezuelans hoped this election would finally bring change and a sense of stability to their troubled nation. The streets buzzed with anticipation, and conversations everywhere revolved around the future of the country. After years of turmoil, the country held a presidential election. For many, it was a rare chance to have their voices heard, and people from all walks of life lined up for hours, determined to cast their ballots despite the uncertainty and fear that lingered in the air. On one side was Nicolas Maduro, in power since 2013, overseeing economic collapse and widespread shortages. His government had become synonymous with hyperinflation, food scarcity, and a mass exodus of citizens seeking better lives abroad. Yet, he still commanded a loyal base, promising stability and resistance against foreign interference. On the other was Edmundo Gonzalez, a surprise unity candidate for the opposition. He represented a coalition of parties and a new hope for millions desperate for change. His campaign energized the opposition, drawing huge crowds and raising expectations for a peaceful transition. When election day came, chaos ensued. Reports of irregularities, confusion at polling stations, and heated arguments between rival supporters filled the day with tension and uncertainty. The Electoral Council declared Maduro the winner, but the opposition claimed victory for Gonzalez. Both sides accused each other of fraud, and the nation was thrown into confusion as conflicting results spread rapidly across social media and television. Suddenly, Venezuela had two presidents, each backed by their supporters. The streets of Caracas and other cities filled with rival rallies, each side refusing to back down, each convinced they were defending democracy. Protests erupted, met with a heavy-handed response from security forces. Demonstrators faced tear gas, rubber bullets, and mass arrests as the government tried to maintain control. The dream of a peaceful transition turned into a nightmare of repression. Night after night, the streets echoed with the sounds of confrontation, and fear gripped communities across the country. Reports of arrests and violence emerged, with the government accusing the opposition of inciting terrorism. International observers expressed concern, but the authorities insisted they were defending the nation from chaos. The election that was supposed to offer hope plunged the country into a new crisis. Businesses shuttered, daily life ground to a halt, and uncertainty hung over every household. Venezuela was more divided than ever, with no clear path forward. Neighbors turned against each other, and the sense of unity that once existed seemed lost. The nation faced a dangerous phase of its long-running crisis. As night fell over Caracas, the future of Venezuela remained uncertain, and the hope for a peaceful resolution seemed further away than ever. The chaos in Venezuela quickly became a global issue. Countries had to choose sides between Maduro and González. The US and its Latin American allies recognized González, seeing him as a hope for democracy. They argued the election was fraudulent, pointing to Maduro's history of banning opposition and controlling media. Supporting González was about defending democratic principles. The US led this charge, refusing to recognize a government that stole an election. On the other side, China and Russia backed Maduro, accusing the US of interference. For them, national sovereignty was paramount. China and Russia saw Venezuela as a strategic foothold, protecting their investments. The world was split, turning Venezuela's crisis into a global chessboard. The stakes were high, with each side defending its interests and vision for the future. By early 2025, the United States had dramatically ramped up pressure on Nicolas Maduro's regime in Venezuela. The Biden administration, facing mounting domestic and international calls for action, made it clear that the status quo was no longer acceptable. Protests against Maduro continued to erupt across Venezuela, and the US government responded with a series of new measures. Despite months of diplomatic efforts, including high-level meetings and back-channel negotiations, peace talks ultimately failed to produce any meaningful breakthrough. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Washington decided to shift gears, moving from diplomacy to a more assertive and muscular approach. The US military significantly increased its presence in the Caribbean, deploying additional Navy ships and conducting frequent operations near the Venezuelan coast. These maneuvers sent a clear message to both Maduro and his international allies. Officially, these operations were justified as part of ongoing efforts to combat drug trafficking in the region. However, it was widely understood that this show of force was also intended to pressure Maduro and deter foreign intervention. The US had strategic interests at stake. Washington wanted a stable, friendly government in Caracas to ensure reliable oil supplies and to push back against China's growing influence in the region. The White House held multiple press conferences emphasizing the importance of Venezuelan stability for global energy markets. Years of crisis had crippled Venezuela's once mighty oil industry, leaving production facilities in disrepair. Meanwhile, China deepened its economic and political ties with Maduro, raising alarms in Washington about a potential shift in the regional balance of power. The economic collapse triggered a massive migration crisis, with millions of Venezuelans fleeing to neighboring countries and even reaching the US southern border. This humanitarian disaster put additional pressure on the US to act. Restoring democracy under opposition leaders like González was increasingly seen by US officials as the only viable path to stabilizing Venezuela and halting the exodus of refugees. Concerns over drug trafficking, oil security, China's influence, and uncontrolled migration all combined to drive the US toward a much tougher stance than before. As military forces postured and protests intensified, the stakes were raised in an already dangerous and volatile confrontation, with the risk of escalation growing by the day. Alongside its strategic moves, the US also ramped up humanitarian aid, aiming to alleviate suffering and win hearts and minds. American officials stressed that their ultimate goal was to restore democracy and address the deepening humanitarian catastrophe. The situation remained tense, with the eyes of the world watching closely. The crisis in Venezuela had become a global issue, with far-reaching implications for international stability and the future of the region. While the US increased pressure, China played a different game. For China, the relationship with Venezuela is about business and strategy. China has invested billions in Venezuela, receiving oil in return. This partnership is crucial for Maduro's survival amid US sanctions. China provides diplomatic cover, blocking resolutions critical of Maduro. It frames its position as a defense of sovereignty, resonating with many countries. However, China's support is cautious. Avoiding direct conflict with the US. China's goal is to protect its investments and maintain its strategic partnership. It plays a long game, hoping its support will outlast the US approach. By supporting Maduro, China ensures its interests are protected. It's a calculated partnership serving China's long-term goals. Why does Venezuela's political dispute matter globally? Oil, influence, and ideals. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, a valuable prize. For the US, a stable Venezuela could be a major oil source. For China, its deals with Venezuela are crucial for energy security. Control over oil drives the geopolitical competition. It's also a battle for influence in Latin America. The US sees the region as its sphere of influence, but China is a major player. The struggle in Venezuela tests this dynamic. The third stake is the battle of ideas, democracy versus authoritarianism. The US supports González as a defense of democratic values. The outcome in Venezuela will be a victory for one of these worldviews. Predicting Venezuela's future is difficult, but we can outline scenarios. One possibility is a continuation of the current stalemate. Maduro remains in power, supported by the military and China. The US and allies recognize González, maintaining sanctions. The opposition remains in a difficult position with a stagnant economy and limited freedom. China cautiously supports Maduro, avoiding escalation with the US. The US hopes for cracks in Maduro's support base. A second scenario involves a negotiated transition. Under pressure, elements within Maduro's government might negotiate with the opposition. This could lead to new elections and national reconciliation. The path to a settlement is challenging, requiring trust and political will. Venezuela's future impacts US-China relations. If the US-backed opposition takes power, it's a win for Washington. A new government would likely pivot away from Beijing. This would be a setback for China, risking its investments. If Maduro consolidates power, it's a victory for China. It would show the limits of US power and embolden other countries. Venezuela would drift further into China's orbit. The outcome sends a signal to Latin America. A democratic transition could inspire opposition movements. The survival of Maduro could embolden authoritarian leaders. The stakes are high for Venezuela and the global order. Venezuela's crisis is more than a domestic dispute. It's a complex crisis at the intersection of national and global power struggles. The US and allies push for democratic restoration, using sanctions and pressure. China and partners support Maduro, defending sovereignty and expanding influence. Caught in the middle are 28 million Venezuelans. The struggle is a defining conflict of our time, illustrating US-China competition. It's a battle between liberal democracy and state-controlled sovereignty. The outcome remains uncertain, with paths leading to different futures. The world cannot afford to look away. Venezuela's fate is a global issue. The resolution will affect energy markets, migration, and global power balance. The story of Venezuela is about a nation's soul and the world we will live in.